The early morning light was just beginning to streak across the California sky as Lieutenant James Hartley, performed the pre-flight check on our dirigible, the Elevate. My co-pilot, Ensign Michael Barnett, was already on board, double-checking our supply of Mark 17 depth bombs and the .30 caliber machine gun mounted aft. Today, like many others since the war had intensified, we were scheduled for a routine anti-submarine patrol off the coast. It was August 16, 1942, a date that would soon be etched in my memory far deeper than any other. As we cast off from Treasure Island, the cool Pacific air felt dense, almost prescient. I remember the hum of the L-8's engines blending with the distant crashing of the waves against the shore, a sound that seemed as routine as the morning coffee warming in our flasks. Michael handed me the day's patrol route with a nod, his face all business. "Let's keep a sharp lookout today, James. Intel suggests there might be more than just fish under these waters," he said, his voice barely rising above the steady thrum of the engine. We reached our designated patrol area near the Farallon Islands, just as the sun climbed fully above the horizon, casting long shadows on the water. That's when I spotted it, an irregular, oily sheen on the surface of the water, stark against the deep blue. It was the kind that suggested something beneath, something man-made. "Michael, see that?" I pointed. He squinted towards where my finger directed and nodded slowly. "Let's take a closer look," he suggested, and I dipped the nose of the L-8 for a better view. Circling the slick, I grabbed the radio and reported back to base. "Base, this is L-8. We've spotted a suspicious oil slick in Sector Bravo 2. Going to investigate further. Over." The crackle of the radio was the last piece of normalcy before the day turned into something else entirely. As I awaited confirmation, Michael readied the smoke flares, a standard procedure to mark the spot for surface vessels to inspect. I remember feeling a twinge of unease as we circled. The ocean seemed too calm, the silence too heavy. "Everything all right, James?" Michael asked, watching me closely. I nodded, but my gaze remained fixed on the water below. "Just feels odd, doesn't it?" I replied, not wanting to admit the growing knot of apprehension in my gut. We dropped 2 smoke flares, watching as the bright red smoke billowed out over the slick. They stood out starkly against the gray-blue of the sea, marking our concern in the most visible way possible. As we completed the maneuver, I kept our altitude low, the coastline still in clear view. The familiar silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge emerged in the distance, a reassuring sign of normalcy. However, as we turned back to continue our patrol, the radio remained silent. No confirmation from base, no further instructions, just static. A glance at Michael confirmed he was thinking the same thing. "Radio trouble," he suggested. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. "Base, this is L-8. Do you copy?" Still nothing but static. The decision to return to the slick came without further radio confirmation. Something about the situation didn't sit right with us, and both Michael and I felt the urgency of it. As the L-8 moved smoothly through the air back toward our smoke markers, I couldn't shake the feeling that this routine mission was about to become anything but. The mystery of what lay beneath that slick, and what the day held, hung heavily in the air as we continued our patrol, oblivious to how drastically our lives were about to change. The silence of the radio was unnerving as we hovered back towards the smoke markers. "Keep trying the radio." "I'll keep us steady," I instructed Michael, my eyes scanning the horizon and the oily patch below. Our L-8 drifted with a purpose, but the lack of response from base added a layer of tension that neither of us had anticipated for what should have been a straightforward patrol. Michael adjusted the dials, his fingers moving with practiced ease, but his brow was furrowed, a clear sign of his growing concern. "Nothing but static, James. This isn't right," he said, his voice low. I nodded, feeling the weight of isolation despite the familiar controls under my hands. The California coast was in sight, yet we might as well have been miles from civilization with our communications cut off. The equipment on board was state-of-the-art, at least for wartime standards. Our airship was not only equipped with depth charges and a machine gun, but also with a newly installed radio system, which should have been more reliable. "Let's do a full equipment check," I suggested, trying to mask my worry. As pilots, we were trained to handle unexpected situations, but the eerie silence from the radio was unsettling. We checked each piece of equipment methodically. The depth bombs were securely in place, untouched, and the machine gun was as ready as it had been when we took off. Everything was in perfect working order, which made the radio silence all the more perplexing. "It's like we're cut off from the world," Michael muttered as he finished his checks. I decided to keep us near the smoke markers, circling the area in case of further developments. "If there's a sub down there, they know we've seen them by now," I thought aloud. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the ocean below, searching for any sign of movement or further anomalies. The minutes stretched into what seemed like hours as we maintained our watch. The sun climbed higher, and the light played off the ocean, occasionally making it hard to keep our eyes on the exact spot of the slick. I thought back to our briefing that morning, the routine nature of it all, and how quickly that had changed. "Stay sharp," I reminded Michael, though I knew he was just as on edge. As we continued our patrol, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It was an instinct, perhaps honed from months of flying these patrols. Michael felt it too. I could tell by the way he occasionally glanced upwards, as if expecting to see something other than the vast expanse of blue sky. I made one more attempt at the radio. "Base, this is L8. Do you copy?" The static crackled back at us, relentless. I slammed my fist lightly against the dashboard, a rare show of frustration. "We'll have to assume we're on our own out here," I concluded, the responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. We decided to expand our search area slightly, still within visual range of the smoke. Our eyes were peeled for any irregularities on the water's surface, any hint that could explain the day's oddities. As we did, the radio suddenly burst to life. "L8, this is base. Do you copy?" The voice was faint, almost swallowed by static. "Base, this is L8. We read you," I replied quickly, relief washing over me. "Repeat your last." "We've had no comms." But just as quickly as it had come, the voice faded into static once more, leaving us with more questions than answers. As we looked at each other, the unspoken thought between us was clear. Something was very wrong, and it was more than just a faulty radio. As we maneuvered the L8 back towards the Golden Gate Bridge, the radio's brief revival and subsequent silence left us uneasy. The coastline of San Francisco provided a picturesque backdrop, but under the current circumstances, it felt more like a silent witness to our growing confusion. "Keep trying the radio every few minutes," I told Michael, my voice steady despite the gnawing concern. He nodded, his focus alternating between the equipment and the expanse of sea below. The L8 was now directly over the Golden Gate, an iconic sight that usually brought a sense of awe. Today, however, it was a grim reminder of how alone we felt. Below, cars and tiny figures moved across the bridge, going about their day, oblivious to the drama unfolding above them in the quiet sky. Our altitude was lower than usual for such patrols. This not only allowed us a better view, but also, I hoped, would improve our radio communication. However, the static remained our only response, creating a barrier that seemed to isolate us further from the rest of the world. Visibility is clear, and yet it feels like we're flying blind, I muttered, scanning the sky and sea with a growing sense of helplessness. Suddenly, the L8 began to exhibit slight, uncommented yaw movements. "You feeling this, Michael?" I asked, gripping the controls tighter. "Yeah, checking controls now," he replied, his calm demeanor helping to steady my own nerves. We went through every checklist, but the airship's behavior didn't match any typical issue. The unexplained movements grew more pronounced, and I struggled to maintain a steady course. "It's like she's got a mind of her own today," I joked half-heartedly, trying to lighten the mood. But the truth was, neither of us found the situation remotely amusing. It was as if invisible hands were nudging the L8, guiding it with an agenda we couldn't understand. As we passed over the city, moving towards the ocean, the L8's behavior became increasingly erratic. The altimeter showed a sudden, inexplicable rise in altitude. "That's not me," I exclaimed, showing my hands to Michael. "I'm not doing that." The airship felt as though it was being pulled upwards by some external force, a notion that defied all my training and experience. The view from our vantage point was surreal. San Francisco Bay on one side, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly on the other. It was beautiful and yet, under the current circumstances, deeply unsettling. "We need to figure out what's going on before," I started to say, but was cut off by the airship steadying just as abruptly as it had started to ascend. We were now at a higher altitude than any part of our routine patrol would have called for. "Check the gas valves. Could be a release issue," I suggested, though it felt more like grasping at straws. Michael proceeded to check, but everything was as it should be. The L8, despite its unexplained behavior, was technically sound, adding another layer of mystery to the already thickening plot of our morning. Resigned to the unpredictability, we decided to continue our patrol, albeit with heightened alertness. The strange occurrences seemed to have passed, at least for the moment, and the L8 settled into a smoother flight pattern. "Keep your eyes peeled, Michael. Anything out of the ordinary, I want to know immediately," I instructed, my voice firm. The day was far from over, and I had a gnawing feeling that more surprises lay ahead. Our flight pattern eventually stabilized, and as we hovered over the coastal areas of Daly City, the uncertainty of the morning's oddities lingered in the cockpit. The airship had regained a semblance of normalcy, but the atmosphere between Michael and me was charged with an unspoken apprehension. "Let's maintain this course," I instructed, though the usual conviction in my command was edged with the strain of the unresolved situation. The view below was familiar yet distant, as if the ordinary life unfolding beneath us was part of a different reality. Homes and small buildings dotted the landscape, a stark contrast to the empty expanse of the ocean we had patrolled earlier. I found myself envying the simplicity of ground life, untouched by the high-stakes uncertainties of our airborne existence. Then, without warning, the L8 began to drift. It was subtle at first, a slight veering off course, easily corrected. But then, as if seized by an unseen force, the drift became a directional pull. "Michael, check the ballast and control cables," I shouted, my calm eroding as the controls seemed to respond sluggishly under my hands. Michael hurried to comply, his movements swift and efficient despite the growing crisis. "Everything looks in order, James. No leaks, no breaches," he reported back, his voice laced with confusion and concern. This unexplained behavior of the L8 was unlike any technical issue documented in our training or manuals. The airship's altitude began to fluctuate wildly. We ascended sharply, then dropped, as if riding an invisible roller coaster. Each rise and fall brought a momentary weightlessness, followed by a heavy, sinking feeling. "It's like we're in the grip of the ocean's current, but up here in the sky," Michael said, a trace of fear in his tone. As we struggled to regain control, the landscape below shifted from urban to the green, open spaces of the surrounding areas. I attempted to navigate us back towards the city, hoping to make an emergency landing if necessary, but the L8 seemed to have its own agenda, pulling us further inland. The ordeal reached its peak as we were dragged over a particularly dense area of Daly City. The airship, now seemingly with a will of its own, began a slow, spiraling descent. "Prepare for a crash landing," I yelled, bracing myself against the control panel. We secured everything that could move, tightened our harnesses, and went through the emergency procedures we hoped never to use. The descent was eerily controlled, unlike any emergency procedure I had ever practiced. The L8 touched down not with the expected crash, but with a gentle, almost deliberate ease. It settled on a patch of open land, causing minimal damage to the surrounding structures and itself. Once we were grounded, Michael and I exchanged a look of bewildered relief. The silence that followed was profound, a stark contrast to the chaotic descent. We quickly began checks for any fire or security hazards, our training kicking in despite the surreal calm of the landing. As I stepped out of the airship to secure the perimeter, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. We had landed safely, miraculously. But the question of how and why remained unanswered, overshadowing the relief of our unscathed descent. The mystery of our uncontrolled flight loomed large, as did the uncertainty of what had led to such a harrowing experience. As the dust settled around the surprisingly intact L-8, the silence of our crash site was quickly shattered by the converging sounds of sirens and shouting. Emergency vehicles from Daly City and nearby San Francisco converged on the field where we had landed. Michael and I were still collecting ourselves, the adrenaline of the landing transitioning into a surreal calm. First responders approached cautiously, as if the airship might spring back into the sky at any moment. "Lieutenant Hartley," a voice called out. I turned to see a group of Navy personnel mixed with local firefighters. "Yes, I'm Hartley, and this is Ensign Barnett," I replied, gesturing towards Michael, who was checking the exterior for damages. We were quickly ushered away from the L-8 for a preliminary medical check. As the medics examined us, questions began to fly. What happened up there? Did you experience any mechanical failures? Was there enemy contact? Each question hammered home the reality that we had no satisfactory answers. Our debriefing would be complicated. While medical teams confirmed we were unharmed, investigative teams swarmed the airship. Their initial focus was on the mechanical integrity of the L-8. I overheard snippets of their conversations, phrases like "controls intact," "fuel levels normal," and "no signs of tampering" filled the air, deepening the mystery. The scene quickly attracted local press, hungry for a story. Cameras flashed as reporters were kept at a respectable distance, but their lenses stayed pointed at us, at the L-8, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Could it have been a UFO? One audacious reporter shouted. His question, meant to provoke, instead captured the baffling nature of our ordeal. As the afternoon waned, Navy officials arrived to take over the investigation. I was separated from Michael and taken to a makeshift command center set up in a nearby building. There, I sat down with a senior investigator. The room was sparse, the mood somber. "Lieutenant, walk me through the events again," the investigator instructed, his pen poised over a notepad. I recounted every detail, from the first spotting of the oil slick to the erratic behaviors of the L-8, and finally to our unexplained landing. The investigator listened intently, occasionally asking me to clarify points or expand on my observations. It became clear that whatever had happened, it was as much a mystery to them as it was to us. Outside, the investigation continued under the fading light. The area was cordoned off, treated as both a crash site and a potential crime scene. Speculations continued to mount. Theories ranged from espionage and sabotage to more fantastical explanations, reflecting the tension and confusion of the times. As night fell, Michael and I were finally allowed to leave, though we were instructed to remain available for further questioning. We walked away from the field, the L-8 silhouetted against the setting sun, a stark reminder of the day's surreal experiences. The mystery of what had caused our uncontrolled flight and safe landing loomed large, leaving us with a sense of unresolved tension and a multitude of unanswered questions that seemed as deep as the ocean we had patrolled earlier that day. In the days that followed our inexplicable landing, the mystery of the L-8 became a subject of both local intrigue and national speculation. The event stirred up a flurry of attention, not just among the military and investigative circles, but also within the community and the families connected to us and the base. I found myself repeatedly recounting the events to a parade of officials, each time hoping that some new detail would emerge from my memory that could explain what had happened. Word of our mysterious flight and the theories surrounding it spread through the local community like wildfire. Neighbors and friends approached me with a mix of concern and curiosity. "James, we heard about your flight on the radio," they would say, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "Do you really think it could have been something unexplainable?" They'd ask hesitantly, often lowering their voices as if afraid of being overheard. At the base, the impact was more profound. Our colleagues treated us with a cautious respect, as if Michael and I had come back from a journey to another world. The mess hall buzzed with whispered theories ranging from ghostly apparitions to secret enemy technology. It was clear that our experience had touched a nerve, tapping into the collective anxiety of a world at war. The historical context of our ordeal wasn't lost on me. The region had a legacy of mysterious disappearances, with several ships and planes having vanished over the decades around the Farallon Islands, known ominously as the Devil's Teeth. Some at the base began to connect our incident with these legends, suggesting that perhaps we had skirted the edges of a similar fate. Family reactions were mixed with relief and lingering dread. My own family grilled me for every detail, hanging on my every word, but growing more anxious with each retelling. "But you're okay, right? Nothing strange happened to you personally?" my sister would ask, searching my face for signs of unseen scars. In the wider naval community, the incident reignited discussions about the safety of airship patrols and the psychological toll of such unexplained events on crews. At a time when every resource was stretched thin by the war, the mystery of the LA prompted a revaluation of patrol strategies and equipment checks. The investigation continued, with no stone left unturned. Naval investigators brought in experts in various fields: aviation mechanics, meteorologists, even a few reluctantly consulted parapsychologists, each trying to frame the incident in their area of expertise. Yet, no explanation fully fit. The airship had been found in perfect operational condition, and all mechanical and environmental theories fell short of convincing. As interest grew, so did the theories, ranging from the plausible to the wild. At a town hall meeting, a well-attended affair meant to address the community's concerns, I listened as people voiced their theories. Could it be something from another dimension? One person suggested, only half joking, or maybe it was just a freak weather pattern. Another countered, trying to stay rational. Reflecting on these discussions, I felt a blend of frustration and fascination. It was human nature to seek explanations for the unexplainable, to find comfort in reason. Yet, some part of me knew that the true explanation for what had happened to Michael and me might remain forever beyond our grasp, lost in the vast, uncharted terrains of air and sea we had traversed that fateful day. The legacy of our flight would likely be one of questions without answers, a mysterious chapter in the annals of naval history. In the weeks that followed our unexpected landing, the lack of a conclusive explanation began to weigh heavily on me. The Navy had concluded its official inquiry, unable to determine a definitive cause for the L-8's erratic behavior and our unexplained descent. The airship itself was repaired and returned to service, but for Michael and me, life didn't just return to normal. The experience had changed something fundamental in us, something that couldn't be repaired as easily as mechanical parts. Often, I found myself staring out at the sea, the vast, unyielding expanse that had nearly claimed us in a way we still couldn't understand. It was during one of these reflective moments that I decided to visit the library, immersing myself in historical accounts and theories about other mysterious disappearances around the Farallon Islands. Each story seemed to echo our own, with elements of the unknown that no investigation could penetrate. I also delved into conversations with older aviators at the base, men who had seen things they couldn't explain during their service, but had learned to live with the ambiguity. "Sometimes the sky keeps its secrets, James," one grizzled veteran told me, his eyes clouded with memories. His words struck a chord, reminding me that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The community's fascination with our story gradually waned, but at gatherings, I would still catch snippets of conversation about that day. Remember when the L8 came down as if guided by ghostly hands? They'd say, a note of eerie reverence in their voices. These tales grew in the telling, and I often wondered how the story of our flight would evolve in years to come. At home, discussions about the incident brought a mix of fear and wonder to my family's dinner table. Could it really have been something otherworldly? My younger brother would ask eagerly, his imagination fueled by the unresolved nature of our tale. In those moments, I found myself torn between encouraging his curiosity and protecting him from the haunting uncertainties that now colored my thoughts. One evening, as I walked along the shore, I met a local historian who had taken a keen interest in our story. He shared insights from his research into regional folklore, including tales of supernatural occurrences and unexplained phenomena along the coast. Your experience might just be the modern manifestation of old legends, he suggested, offering a perspective that was both fascinating and unsettling. This blend of history, folklore, and personal experience led me to pen down my thoughts, documenting not just the events, but also the impact they had on everyone involved. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to process the swirling theories and emotions that had gripped me since that day. As I wrote, I tried to reconcile the various theories about what had happened. Was it a freak atmospheric anomaly? Had we inadvertently crossed into a zone of magnetic or gravitational disturbance? Or was there, lurking in the unexplored shadows of our understanding, a more profound and paranormal explanation? Each theory seemed as plausible as it was improbable. Reflecting on the cultural and historical context of our flight, set against the backdrop of World War II and its myriad technological and supernatural speculations, I began to see our experience as a small but intricate piece of a much larger mosaic of human endeavor and mystery. In the end, the legacy of our flight remains a tapestry woven from fact and speculation, history and myth. It serves as a reminder of the vastness of our world and the limits of our understanding. As I conclude this account, the questions remain, but perhaps that is as it should be. After all, some mysteries are not to be unraveled but to be pondered, adding depth and color to the fabric of our lives.